Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 2 different sections. In the analysis part, we'll first have a discussion with respect to the meaning and importance of female labor force participation rate and the ways to enhance it. Then, in the second article, we'll have a discussion with respect to the concerns associated with the growing number of internet shutdowns in the country and the ways to deal with it. Then, in the simplified section, we'll have a discussion with respect to 5 different articles with special reference to UPSC Prelims 2025 along with the value addition. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first article of the day, this is with respect to Beyond Kitchen, enhancing the female labor force participation rate. Now, what we have been observing in the last few years is that there has been a continuous increase in the overall female labor force participation rate in the country. Specifically, when we talk about the rural India, so there was a 12% increase if we take the time frame from 2018 till 22. Now, this gives us the untapped opportunity for enhancing the female employment generation in the country. And it is in this line that the author in this particular column has said that there needs to be a greater impetus on skill training, on proper credit disbursal, and providing a robust legal support mechanism so as to enhance the overall employment opportunities, including the female employment opportunities. Now, this is a part of GS2, social sector, women and inclusive growth, GS3. Now, let's talk about what is the labor force participation rate. See, it is basically the proportion of the population which is engaged in labor. That is, either who are working or actively seeking the work, right? Now, in India, it is carried out through the periodic labor force survey, which is actually carried out by the National Statistics Organization, which is a part of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, if you talk about the numbers, so it was 55.2% in the year 2022. And if you talk about the male labor force participation rate, it was 78.5 in 2023. And for female labor force participation rate, it was 37. Now, if you talk about the numbers with respect to 22, it was 32.8%. But still, as I said in the beginning, what we are trying to say is that if you compare it with the world average, it is still quite low. But if you talk about the rural India, so there has been an increase by 12 percentage points, right? So it was 24.6% in 2018 and it increased to 36.6% in 2022, right? But the overall female labor force participation rate, as I said, it's still quite low when compared to the world average. The world average is 49% and it is provided by the World Bank. Now, what is the primary reason for this? See, the primary reason is that majority of the section of the society which is engaged in the unpaid work, it is primarily the women, right? So if you look at the numbers, we have only 9.3% of the males who are engaged in unpaid family labor work. And 36.5% of the females are engaged in the unpaid family work, right? So you can also have a look at the graph that there has been an increase in the rural female labor force participation rate, right? From 24.6% to 36.6%, right? And again, overall there has been an increase, but still compared to the world average, it is still quite low. Now, what are the factors responsible for the low female labor force participation in the country? First is the social norms. Now, what do we mean by social norms? See, these are basically the informal rules of conduct, right? Which are basically in the minds of the people. So generally, we have a perception in the society that it's the men who are the breadwinners of the family and the women, the primary responsibility of the women is to take care of the household, right? So that is one of the reasons which basically inhibit the participation of women in the labor force. Second is the unpaid care work. Now, if you talk about the first point, that is social norms, you can also look at this particular information, which is itself provided by the periodic labor force survey. It says that the social reason comprise of 3.4%. So it is primarily a huge number, right? So 3.4% of the women feel that it is primarily because of the social reasons that they are unable to participate in the labor. Next is the unpaid care work. See, in India, the situation is that women face time poverty. That is, that they basically have to manage the domestic chores and also they face the double burden. Those women who are also working and along with that managing the household. So again, what we are trying to say is that it is primarily the domestic responsibilities which inhibit the participation of women in the labor force. So we have the childcare, personal commitments in the home which contribute to 44.5%. Now, next is gender bias norms. See, we have a patriarchal mindset in the society. which basically disallows women to be a part of the labor force, right? That is one of the primary reasons. Also, we had a survey conducted by the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, which said that the people who were surveyed, 92% of them said that it is normal that if a woman is affected by intimate partner violence, right? So that is the kind of status we have. So that is one of the reasons which obviously prohibits the participation of women in the labor force. Next is caste discrimination. See, what we are trying to say through this is that we have a greater number of female labor force participation when we talk about the lower caste, right? But again, the kind of employment they're working in, that is of low productivity, right? So again, it inhibits their social mobility, right? That is one of the reasons. Next is the salary and wage disparity. What we are trying to say is that there is a disparity when we talk about the females and the males. For the same work, women are getting less as compared to men. And according to a particular data, what we can say is that for a regular work in India, a man actually earns 28% more than a woman, right? And for a casual work, a man in India earns more than 48% than a woman, right? So there is a disparity. Again, what we call this phenomena as a glass ceiling, right? So this is basically the unconscious bias which is there in the minds of the people, which prohibits the participation of women in the employment opportunities. Next is educational levels. See, what we are trying to say is, if you look at this particular graph, you can see that as the education attainment increases, there is the increase in the female labor force participation rate, right? And the kind of work which women do, it is more productive, right? Also, according to the data which is provided in this particular article, we have this self-employed women with any particular formal training or vocational training, they only comprise 3%. So most of the women, they are not having proper vocational training, right? So that is one of the reasons. So you can also look at this particular picture, info diagram, right? So it says that we have 67% of the women who are basically outside the labor force, and majority of them, it's primarily because of the domestic duties which they are performing. And then we have got 32.8% of the females in the labor force, which are a part of the overall employment scenario, and major chunk of them, they are self-employed, right? So that is the kind of situation. Now, how does greater female labor force participation impacts the society? See, first is economic growth, greater economic growth. If you have a greater chunk of the population, that is the women who are a part of the labor force, obviously it would lead to the boosting of the overall economy, right? If you talk about countries like China or Vietnam, what you see is that the female labor force participation in those countries, it's quite high when compared to India. And it is the primary reason that they actually witness high economic growth. Next is poverty reduction. It is but obvious that when you have women in the labor force, definitely it would lead to poverty reduction. They will have more productive employment opportunities. Then it would also lead to enhanced standard of life, right? Next is human capital development. What the research says is that once you have women in the labor force, they invest more in the education and health of their children. So definitely it leads to more human capital development, right? Next is gender equality and empowerment. What we are trying to say is that once you have more number of women in the labor force, that would lead to gender equality, more gender equality. That is, they'll have more bargaining power. That is, they'll have more decision-making power, right? Next is fertility and population growth. What we are trying to say is that it has been observed that as the labor force participation rate increases, female labor force participation rate increases, it leads to reduction in the fertility rate. Now, it is primarily because of the enhanced educational attainments which women have, more productive employment opportunities, and then a subsequent reduction in the fertility rates, right? Next is reduce gender-based violence. When women come out from their homes, become a part of the workforce, they are more aware with respect to their rights, right? And thus it leads to a situation where it leads to less gender violence committed against them, right? And they can also have the legal recourse mechanism, right? Next is labor market and talent pool. Obvious that once you will have more number of women in the labor force, then you'll have more competition. It would lead to the enhancement of the overall talent pool, right? And that would give a boost to the economy. Also, if you look at this particular infographic, you can see that as the labor force increase, right, female labor force increase, it also reduces the gender gap, right? So if you talk about India, we have 53, right? That is the gender gap we have. And then the female labor force participation rate in India, it's quite low. But for country like Nepal, what you see is that the gender gap is low, but the female labor force participation, it's quite high. So there is an inverse relation. That is, when you have increase in the female labor force participation rate, that would subsequently lead to the lowering of the gender gap, right? Again, as we said, that once you'll have more number of women in the labor force, that would also lead to the overall attainment of education, both by males and the females. So it would lead to more educational attainment, right? Now, what have been the government initiatives to improve the female labor force participation in India? The first is the labor codes. So we have got 4 labor codes. Now, in particular, the Code on Social Security, it provides the mandatory maternity benefit. It talks about the insurance schemes for the women. It talks about the mandatory creche facilities in proper employment places, right? Then we have got the Code on Wages. Now, this specifically says that there has to be a pay parity when we talk about the males and the females. There cannot be any arbitrary discrimination between man and women once we talk about the pay disbursals. Next is the schemes like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao scheme. Now, this is basically a tri-ministerial effort. 3 ministries were involved, and it focuses upon the survival, the protection, and the educational attainment of the women. Next is the prevention of sexual harassment at workplaces. Now, again, the objective of this particular act is to prevent the sexual harassment at different workplace, and it provides a very robust grievance redressal mechanism, right? Next is Working Women Hostel scheme. Now, through this scheme, what the government is trying to do is it's trying to provide these subsidies for the construction of these hostels so that women can come and stay there at subsidized rate, or even the expansion of those existing hostels, right? And then they would be in a better position to be a part of the workforce. Next is one-stop centers and the universalization of the women helpline. Again, through these measures, what we are trying to do is we are trying to help the women in distress or women who are facing violence, right? So this is basically for that. Next is skilling initiatives. Government, through the Women Industrial Training Institutes, ITIs, or through National Skill Development Corporation, or through schemes like Stand Up India, it is trying to enhance the overall schemes and the entrepreneurship of these women, right? Next is Manrega, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Now, through this particular act, there is a particular reservation for women. That is 1/3 of these jobs have to be given to the women, right? Again, what has to be the way forward? Now, the first is that there has to be a focus upon enhancing the quality education. See, irrespective of the social or the cultural background, the women specifically, they should be provided with quality education. That is the foremost thing. Because again, when they'll have the quality education, they'll be in a better position to go for the productive employment opportunities, right? So that is something which is really needed. Next is access to the formal credit. Very important. What we're trying to say is that these traditional lenders, for example, banks, they are actually hesitant to give loans to these women, right? If they want to start their own enterprise. So there has to be schemes which focus upon making sure that these women should have adequate credit so that they can basically start their own enterprises. Next is simplifying the regulatory framework. What we have observed is, as put in this article, that sometimes even when we have the women are educated, they have all the skills to start an enterprise, because of the regulatory mechanism, they basically face different hurdles. So there has to be a simplification of the overall regulatory framework. Next is combating the caste discrimination. Very important. See, what we need to make sure is that there has to be affirmative actions. There has to be affirmative actions in the form of reservation so that women from the lower strata, they can be a part of the more productive employment opportunities. Next is role of self-help group in women empowerment. So we have the models like Seva, Self-Employed Women Association by Ella Bhatt, or we have Kudamushri in Kerala, right? So what we're trying to say is that there has to be increase in these self-help groups so that they can basically provide the credit to these women and they can then start their entrepreneurial activities. Next is addressing the structural rigidities. See, again, what we're trying to say is that we have this preconceived notion that women should not be a part of the labor force, right? These are entrenched notions in the society, patriarchal mindsets. We have to basically get, people should discard them. Because again, this is what is responsible for lower participation of women, right? Next is there has to be focus upon vocational training. Very important. So what we are trying to say is that adequate training has to be provided to women, specifically the vocational training. Now this has to be done in line with the industry demand, and that can be done by overhauling the industrial training institutes. Next is promoting gender neutral social norms. Important. Again, what we are trying to say is that these social norms, gender neutral social norms, they should be made a part of the educational curriculum. People, especially children, should be made taught that there is perfect equality in the society. There should not be any kind of discrimination, right? So that since childhood, they develop this particular mindset. So again, what we're trying to say is definitely there has been an increase in the female labor force participation rate, but there are some issues, there are some loopholes as we just talked about, and there is a need to include women in the labor force so that we can have a more sustainable and inclusive economic growth. That is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Now let's talk about a mains practice question. The question says, the current increasing trend in the female labor force participation, especially in rural India, indicates an untapped opportunity for female employment generation. Discuss. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. Coming to the next article, it is the digital curfew, that is internet shutdowns in the country. So what we have been observing in the last few years is that there has been increasing number of instances of internet shutdowns imposed by the government. Obviously, it leads to the restriction of the fundamental rights. But on the other side, it is also leading to huge losses when we talk about the overall economy. So, for example, in the year 2020, the Indian economy suffered huge loss to the tune of 2.8 billion US dollars, right? Because of these internet suspensions. Now, what the authors are trying to say in this particular article is that it is primarily because the reason is that states and the union government, they are not following the set of guidelines which were given by the Supreme Court with respect to dealing with these internet shutdowns. Now, this is a part of GS2, fundamental rights, government policies and interventions. Now, what do we mean by these internet shutdowns? See, it implies the deliberate disruption of the internet or electronic communications, which basically render the flow of information through the internet inaccessible. Again, what we are trying to say is that these internet shutdowns, which are imposed by the government, either they can be for a specific population or it can be for a specific area, right? And ultimately, the objective of the government is to exert control over the flow of information, so as to restrict the flow of the information. Now, if you look at the numbers, right, so you can just see that the numbers are provided here. In the year 2022, the total number of suspensions which were there globally were 187. And out of these, 84 were in India, right? Huge. So India basically has one of the largest number of internet shutdowns, right? Again, if you look at the number of URL blocking by air, what you can see is it has increased continuously. So in the year 2018, we had the instances of 2,799 URLs being blocked by the government, but it jumped to 9,849 in the year 2020, and then it basically was 6,775 in the year 2022. So the numbers is quite high. Now, what are the provisions related to the internet shutdowns in the country? See, we have Section 5 Subclause 2 of the Indian Telegraph Act of 1885, read along with the temporary suspension of telecom services rules of 2017. Now, what do these rules say? These rules say that the Union Home Secretary or the State Home Secretary, they can basically order the suspension of the internet, right? Also, in emergency situation, the joint officer of the joint secretary level can also do so, right? Again, what the rules say that within 5 days, the order has to be reviewed and the internet shutdown should not last more than 15 days. Next is, we have Section 144 of the erstwhile Code of Criminal Procedure. It says that the officer of the rank of executive magistrate or subdivisional magistrate or district magistrate can basically give the orders for the suspension of the internet in that particular jurisdiction, right? So these are the orders. These are the rules through which the orders are given. Now, what are the arguments regarding the internet shutdowns? Some people say that in some circumstances, internet shutdowns become inevitable. Others say that it should not be there specifically in a country like India, which is a democratic polity, right? So what are the arguments in favor? First is that it helps prevent the spread of hate speech and fake news. Again, what the government is, the take of the government is that it is trying to basically stop the spread of the misinformation or the fake news, right? So if you remember that we had the farmers' protest, so in that particular time frame, what the government order was in the NCR region, there was the suspension of the internet services, right? So as to make sure that there is the stop to the spread of the fake information. Next is help curb the organization and mobilization of protests. Again, the objective of the government is to maintain tranquility, to maintain peace in a particular area. So if you remember that once you had the abrogation of Article 370, we had this particular suspension of the internet in Jammu Kashmir, primarily because so as to curb the protest, right? So as to maintain peace and stability in that particular area. Next is help protect the national security and sovereignty. Again, if you remember that we had the Dokulam crisis. Now, in the areas adjoining the border, right, there were some districts where the internet shutdowns was imposed, primarily to make sure that those areas remain safe, right? No misinformation is spread. Next is help control the distribution and consumption of content. See, sometimes what you see is that on the internet you have some disturbed visuals, disturbed content, which can basically affect people psychologically, which can basically affect children. So for those content, for that particular content, the internet shutdowns is also applicable. Now, if you look at this particular infographic, you can see that India, number of internet shutdowns by country in 2018, it was highest in India. Now, what are the arguments against these internet shutdowns? First is it undermines democratic trust and accountability. See, what we're trying to say is that what has been observed is that whenever the administration imposes these restrictions, it is not in a proper order format, right? There has to be a proper order. Executive decisions are taken and orders are not written. Now, if someone wants to basically appeal against that particular order, there has to be a proper written format. But the executive doesn't follow that. And it is primarily because of that executive it has been alleged that there is arbitrariness in the process. Also, what we are saying is that in a democracy, there has to be a trust. People basically trust the government. But if the government again and again fall back on these options, so the trust erodes. There is the erosion of public trust. Again, the government is not then accountable. There is no proper flow of information. People are not aware with respect to what the real information is about, right? So that is the reason that it undermines the overall accountability framework also. Next is it enables the authoritarian government to silence the critics. See, specifically in those regimes where you have got the authoritarian government, what we have observed is that there is very rough and rigid censorship on the internet, so as to make sure that the critics are silenced, right? So as to make sure that there is no information which is flowed from these people against the government, right? So also in a democratic polity, it finds no place. They are ineffective and counterproductive. See, again, what we're trying to say is that these are short-term measures. They are not addressing the root cause. So primarily, the objective of the government should be to basically address the root cause. But what they're doing is they're just basically doing the internet shutdowns. And thus, it is not leading to the situation of peace and stability in the society. And people still have the resentment, right? They are arbitrary and prone to abuse. Again, what we are trying to say is, since the executive is responsible for imposing these shutdowns, many times it has been found that these restrictions are arbitrary. They don't have any proper reason with them, right? Now, what are the impacts of internet shutdowns? See, again, what we are saying is that whenever you have the arbitrary imposition of internet shutdowns, it violates the fundamental rights. So we had the famous case of Anuradha Basin versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court very clearly said that the flow of information through the internet, it is a fundamental right. So we have got Article 19, Subclause 1, Subclause A, right to freedom of speech and expression, and the right to carry out trade and profession under Article 19, Subclause 1, Subclause G, right? So once you have got the internet suspension, it violates the fundamental rights. Next is, it violates the right to information. So you must know that it was the famous Raj Narayan versus Union of India case of 1975, where the Supreme Court very clearly said that the right to information is a fundamental right. Next is, it violates the right to internet. So we had a very important case, that was the Fahim Shireen versus State of Kerala, where the Supreme Court declared the right to internet as a fundamental right, right? So it violates all these rights. Once you have got the arbitrary imposition of the internet, it basically violates these fundamental rights. Next is economic consequences. As we just studied in the beginning. So in the year 2020, the Indian economy overall suffered the losses to the tune of $2.8 billion, right? That's a huge amount. Moreover, what we are saying is that it leads to, there are different economic enterprises who are carrying out their trade and profession through the internet. Once you have got the internet suspension, their whole economic activity stops. And then it also leads to the loss of jobs, right? Next is disruption of education. Very important. So what we are saying is that we have got e-learning platforms many institutes and the colleges, they are providing the education through the internet. But once you have got internet shutdowns in place, the children in that particular locality, they're unable to access that quality material, that education material, and therefore it also leads to the lowering of the educational attainment. Next is impediment to disaster response. So once you have got these internet shutdowns in place in a particular area, it can lead to the coordination issues. For example, let's say a sudden, let's say a particular catastrophe has taken place or a disaster has taken place in a particular area. And if there is a particular internet shutdown in that particular space, it can lead to coordination issues, and thus it can lead to more tragedies. Next is trust and censorship concerns. As I said, that in a democracy, people basically trust the government. There is a proper social contract which is there. But if the government again and again imposes these restrictions, it erodes the public trust, right? Next is international repercussions. So we have got many organizations, international organizations, who have very clearly, very objectively criticized the actions of the government of India, saying that they have alleged that the kind of measures taken by the Indian government, they are arbitrary, they are not based on sound reasons, right? Then it impacts on journalism and reporting. What we are trying to say is that, see, in journalism, what is really important is that there has to be a free flow of information, so that the journalists can basically fetch proper information, and then after doing a proper research, they can transmit the research to the public. But again, if there is the internet shutdowns, none of these things would take place. So obviously it impacts journalism and reporting. Now, what should be the way forward? See, what we are trying to say is that the existing framework has to be first reformed. Supreme Court has already given a set of guidelines. They have to be adhered to. Again, the loopholes must be avoided. For example, whenever the executive is imposing these restrictions, there have to be a proper order in place, right? So that can be appealed in the judiciary, right? Next is ensuring the accountability of the authorities. Whenever the officials take these actions, they should be held accountable for these actions. Primarily, what we see is that because of the immunities available to these officers, they are basically in this position that they again and again impose these restrictions. Next is exercising alternate options. For example, specific websites, they can be basically suspended. The content can be removed. So the whole internet need not to be suspended. What you can do is you can basically suspend a particular content. Next is adhere to Supreme Court guidelines. So we have this famous Anuradha Bhasin case where the Supreme Court laid a framework, a guidelines. What it said is that whenever you have the imposition of the internet shutdowns, first, there has to be lawful. It has to be lawful. Second, it has to be temporary, right? It has to be proportionate. And then it also said that it is subject to judicial review, right? So these guidelines must be followed by the state government and the union government. Again, what we are trying to say is that in a democracy like India, the internet shutdown, see, obviously, when you have the circumstances which basically warrant the kind of application of the internet shutdowns, obviously it becomes necessary. But it should not be a regular exercise. It should not be arbitrarily done, because in a democracy like India, it finds no place. So that is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Let's have a mains practice question. The question says, internet shutdowns in India should strive to balance the maintenance of public order and safeguarding the individual liberties. Explain. 15 marks, 250 words. Do write a particular answer on this question. So coming to the simplified section, we have the first article which talks about the meeting of the chairman of the 16th Finance Commission with the officials of Kerala government, right? So the gist of the article is what the officials of the Kerala government has said, that there has been increasing instances where the central government is relying more and more on the cess and surcharge. Now, what is the issue? See, we have got the taxes which are collected by the government, right, which form a part of the divisible pool of taxes which are shared by the state. But you also have the cess and surcharge, right, which the center imposes, but that does not form a part of that basket, that pool, which are shared with the states. So what the central government, it has been alleged that it has been increasing its reliance on the cess and surcharge, right? And therefore, the overall amount of taxes, the share of the taxes which the state should ideally get, they are not getting that proper amount, right? So that is the complete gist of the article, and we'll also look at different infographics. So we have got the chairman of the 16th Finance Commission. They basically, he met with the officials of the Kerala government, and grievance of states were also told to him that the center's increasing reliance on cesses and surcharge, right? And he termed these issues as complicated issue. Now again, as it is also a worrisome issue for different states because they are not getting a share out of it. Also, in a way, what he said, the chairman of the Finance Commission said that it is also a way through which the center, that is the union government, can basically increase its fiscal space, collect more resources through the cess and surcharge. Again, what we need to know is that the cess and surcharge collected by the center, they need not to be shared with the states, and their share in the gross tax revenue has risen over the years, prompting the states to demand that the levies should be capped, and that beyond that particular limit, it should flow into the divisible pool, right? So what they're demanding is, the states are saying that there has to be a particular limit on the cess and surcharge. If the center is collecting over and above that, that should form a part of the divisible pool of taxes. Again, the chairman of the Finance Commission has said that the share of taxes, the share of states in the divisible pool has risen from 32% in the 13th Finance Commission to 42% in the 14th Finance Commission. And again, the center is entitled to collect these cess and surcharge under the Constitution, under Article 270, right? So it is, we cannot really do anything with respect to that, because it is a constitutional position which is there, and in that line, center is collecting the cess and surcharge. Now, if you look at this particular infographic, what you can see is that the revised estimates of financial year 24, right, and the budget estimates of 25, it would show, look at the surcharge, look at the cess which are basically collected, it's huge. So we have got the revised estimates show that almost 3 lakh crores were with respect to the cess and surcharge, and the budget estimates of 2025, they're far more than that, 3.27 lakh crores, right? So that is the kind of numbers and the reliance of center which is there on these cess and surcharge. Now, let's talk about what do we mean by surcharge. See, let's take an example. So we have a particular individual who has an income of more than 50 lakhs per year, right? Now, let's say the amount of tax which has been imposed on that person, it comes out to be around 10 lakhs, right? So again, cess surcharge is something which is a tax imposed on tax. That is, let's say if you have got 10% of surcharge, so it means that if the person is paying 10 lakhs as the total amount of taxes, so 10% of this amount would be there on the 10 lakhs, so it would come out to be 1 lakh. So overall, the total amount has to be paid as 11 lakhs by that particular person. So it is a tax on tax, right? It's an additional charge applied as a percentage of the total tax liability. It increases the tax burden for specific categories, often higher income groups, right? What is the applicability? Primarily levied on income tax and corporate tax. Now, for individuals, surcharge rates, it varies, and the executive has the responsibility to determine the surcharge rates. So it can be 10% for income above 50 lakhs but below 1 crore. So these are these slabs. Now, usage, now this is for general purpose. The amount collected can be used for anything, right? Revenue generated is used for general expenditure and becomes a part of the Consolidated Fund of India. No dedicated allocation, serves overall financial requirements of the government. So primarily the objective is to tax the super rich, right? So as to make sure that additional revenues are collected from them. Now, let's talk about what do we mean by cess, right? So cess is also a tax on tax imposed for a specific purpose. You must have heard about the education cess. You must have heard about the road tax, right? So the amount collected from these tax is basically used for that particular purpose, right? That is what the cess is all about. Now, if in this particular case, what we see is that if you want to calculate the cess, so overall, the tax liability of this person was 10 lakhs, then the surcharge was 1 lakh. Now, the total amount has to be at 11 lakhs. Now, let's say there is a cess of 4%. So 4% of 11 lakhs would be used as a cess, right? So it is the tax on tax. Now, as I said, that the funds which are accumulated through the cess, they are used for the specific purpose. For example, if you have educational cess, that would be used for making the educational institutes. If you have got road cess, that would be used for constructing more number of roads, right? Funds collected through cess are reserved for dedicated causes. It is not a part of the consolidated fund and must be spent on that particular stated purpose. Now, for example, we have got the health and education cess, right, 4%. Then we've got the Swachh Bharat cess. Then we've got the road and infrastructure cess. Then we've got the Krishi Kalyan cess. So as you can see that you have the specific purpose which is included in this particular cess. So it applies to all taxpayers uniformly, right? Unlike the surcharges which are income specific. So understand that its surcharges are mostly for the super rich, right? For those people who are earning huge amounts of money. While cess is imposed on everyone. It is for everyone. It is non-divertible. That is, it cannot be used for any general purpose. It has to be used for that particular dedicated purpose. For example, if it is with respect to the health and education, it has to be used for that specific purpose, right? Now, again, this article talks about the concerns of the states with respect to the divisible pool of taxes, right? So this chart gives you a very important information. So the chart 1 says that if we talk about the aggregate resources raised, so what you will see is that 62.7%, it is raised by the union government, right? And you only have 37.3% which is raised by the states. But if you talk about the aggregate expenditure incurred, what you will see is that the center only is responsible for 37.6% of the overall expenditure, while there is a disproportionate burden on the states where they have to actually spend almost 62.4% of the overall expenditure, right? Now, again, if you look at this chart 2, what it shows is that the state share in the divisible pool of taxes mandated by the Finance Commission and the actual share devolved, right? So this is 41%. This ideally should have been given to the states, but in the financial year 23, what was given as 29.6%. So there is a huge gap between what was mandated and what is actually being given to the states. Next is the chart 3rd shows the states and the union government share of the gross tax revenue. State share of the center's taxes recorded a steep fall in financial year 2021, but the union government share continued to rise. Again, just look at this. Center share is continuously increasing, right? It was 19.34 lakh crores, while for the states, it actually dipped, right? And it is quite low when compared to the union, right? Next is that if you talk about the share of the cess and the surcharge, which is the objective of the article, it has been continuously increasing. Now, why the union government is doing that? Primarily because so that that amount can be used for the specific purposes which is actually deemed by the center, right? So that it is not a part of the divisible pool of taxes. And look at this, right? Meteoric rise in the collection of the cess and surcharges, right? There was 19.9% increase when we talk about the cess and surcharge, right? So that is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. There are concerns associated with respect to the divisible pool of taxes, and that is the reason that the officials of the Kerala government, they met with the chairman of the 16th Finance Commission. That is what you need to know with respect to this article. So coming to the next article, it is with respect to the code of conduct which the judges in the country need to follow. So the gist of the article is that we have a particular judge of the Allahabad High Court. He made some statements which were alleged to be communal, and that is the reason that there was wide public criticism against him. Now, what the article says is, the gist of the article is that we already have a process, a constitutional process of impeachment of judges of the Supreme Court and the High Court. That is there. But in addition, what we also have is the code of conduct, right? So we have a document which was basically released by the Supreme Court in the year 1997. And then we have got the second principles, the Bangalore principles of 2022, which serve as the code of conduct which the judges have to follow, right? So what the author is trying to say is that there has to be a more reliance on these conduct. The judges need to be aware of what they're saying because they are a part of the public gaze, they are a part of the public scrutiny, and they should not make such statements, right? So what we basically see is that we have got Justice Yadav, and he has said the country would function as per the wishes of the majority. And then he has also pushed for the uniform civil code, and he made different statements as the Hindus revere women as goddesses. Even members of the other community practice polygamy, halala, or triple talaq. The Supreme Court has taken a view with respect to what this particular judge has said, has taken a note and on what this particular person has said. Now, then there are different organizations which have also basically complained to the Supreme Court with respect to the conduct of this particular judge. So we have got the All India Lawyers Union. They have written to the Chief Justice of India saying that the judge's comment lean away from the democracy and towards a Hindutva Rashtra. Then we have got the Campaign for Judicial Accountability and Reforms. They have alleged that the Justice Yadav participation in a right-wing event and his communally charged statements were a brazen violation of his oath of office. Then we have got the President of the Supreme Court Bar Association, Kapil Sibal. He has called for the impeachment of the High Court judge. Now, if we talk about what is judicial ethics is all about, so as I just told you, we have got primarily two documents. The code of conduct which must be followed. So, judiciary draws its power from two fountains. First is public acceptance of the authority of the judiciary, and the second is the integrity of the judiciary. So, Again, experiences has led the judiciary to codify the best conventions of the judicial conduct, both in and out of the court. Again, this is important. It's not just within the premises of the court, it is also outside that. So we have got the restatement of values of judicial life. Now this was basically adopted by the Supreme Court in the year 1997. So the very first rule of this code says that the behavior of the judge must reaffirm the people's faith in the impartiality of the judiciary. That is the first thing. It also says that any act of a judge of the Supreme Court or a High Court, whether in official or personal capacity, which erodes the credibility of the perception, has to be avoided. The last rule of the code, which basically mandates that a judge must all times be conscious that he is under public gaze, right? Then we have got the Bangalore Principles of Judicial Conduct of 2002. Basically, they present a framework to regulate the judicial conduct. It requires a judge to ensure that his conduct maintains and enhances the confidence of the public, the legal profession, and the litigants in the impartiality of the judges and of the judiciary. So we have got the 2002 document. It also recognizes a judge's entitlement to freedom of expression, and it says that he or she shall always conduct himself or herself in such a manner so as to preserve the dignity of the judicial office and the impartiality and the independence of judiciary. Again, the gist is that we are trying to emphasize that the judge in and out of the court must adhere to the principles of impartiality, right? Must basically make sure that people have trust in the judiciary. So that judge has to maintain that. More importantly, the charter requires a judge to be aware of and understand that there is diversity in the society, and he or she must treat everyone equally. Now, we have the impeachment process. So we have the Constitution which provides the impeachment process. The judges of the Supreme Court and the High Courts can be removed by an order of the President after a successful process of impeachment on the grounds of proved misbehavior or incapacity. Very important. So the grounds are proved misbehavior or incapacity. The motion of the removal of the Constitutional Court judge must be supported by a special majority, that is majority of the total membership of the House and of at least 2/3 of the members present and voting. Right now, except on the removal motion, the Constitution prohibits the legislature from discussing the allegations. That is a kind of separation of powers we have, right? So only when you have this particular motion which is there in the legislature, there can be a discussion. Otherwise, there cannot be any discussion with respect to the conduct of the judges in the parliament, right? Or in the state legislatures. However, the Supreme Court has also evolved an in-house procedure to give judges facing serious allegations a window to take voluntary retirement. Again, see, what we are trying to say is that this impeachment process is something which is a disgrace to the judiciary, right? So if a judge is basically impeached, that would be very disgraceful. So the judiciary, specifically the Supreme Court, has invented an in-house procedure where it looks into the complaint, it then verifies it. If it finds that there are some issues, then it can ask that particular judge to seek voluntary retirement. The procedure was formally adopted in 1999 and was put out in the public domain in 2014. The procedure allows the complaint against the High Court judge to be addressed to the President or the Chief Justice of India or the Chief Justice of that particular High Court. Now, if a complaint is received by the High Court Chief Justice, depending upon the seriousness of the grievance, a response can be sought from the judge concerned, and if a deeper probe is called for, the Chief Justice could forward it to the Chief Justice of India. Then the President, on receiving a complaint, he refers it to the Chief Justice of India. Then the Chief Justice can also forward it to the concerned Chief Justice of the High Court, who would then follow the same procedure of collecting the statement from the judge concerned, and if the allegations are serious, he can then forward it to the Chief Justice of India, right? The Chief Justice can then appoint a fact-finding committee of 2 Chief Justices and a High Court judge, and if the committee reports sufficient material to remove the judge, the Chief Justice of India can ask the latter to retire, right? This is basically the in-house mechanism. It is very different from the impeachment process, right? The Chief Justice can intimate the President and the PM about the allegations. See, again, if, let's say the committee has come up with the fact and said that yes, the judge should he should seek voluntary retirement, and if that particular judge does not abide by that, then the Chief Justice of India can basically refer the matter to the President, and then the impeachment process can be carried out. Now, what is this impeachment process? Let's study about this. So we have got the impeachment process of Supreme Court and the High Court judges. So we have got Article 124 subclause 4 and subclause 5, which basically talks about the impeachment process, governs the removal of Supreme Court judge. Then we have Article 217 subclause 1 subclause B, which does it for the High Court. Judges can be removed on the grounds of, as I told, proved misbehavior and or incapacity. Now, we have a particular statutory backing. So we have got the Judges Inquiry Act of 1968. It basically deals with the procedure which has to be carried out with respect to the impeachment. Details the procedure for the impeachment, sets up the inquiry process by a judicial committee. Now, what is the process for the impeachment? So we have got the initiation, how that there has to be first an initiation with respect to the removal of that particular judge. So it requires a motion signed by 100 Lok Sabha members or 50 Rajya Sabha members. Then the admittance of the motion takes place. The Speaker of the Lok Sabha or the Chairman of the Rajya Sabha can either admit or reject the motion. Again, please understand that it depends on the will of the chair. Judicial and Inquiry Committee. So upon admittance, a 3-member committee is constituted. So we have got the sitting Supreme Court judge, a Chief Justice of the High Court, and a distinguished jurist. Now, then the process of investigation is carried out. Now, it investigates the charges against the judge and submit its report. If the charges are not proven, the process stops. Then there is a proper parliamentary debate and voting takes place. If the charges are proven, the motion is debated in both the House of the Parliament and it must be passed by special majority. That is 2/3 of the members present and voting and a majority of the total membership of the House. Then finally, if it is passed, you have the presidential order. If the motion is passed in both the houses, the president issues an order for the removal of the judge. This is what the impeachment process is all about. Now, so what are the safeguards for judicial independence? First is that, it's not like, there is a very robust separation of power mechanism. It's not like that depending upon the whims and the fancies of the legislature, the judges can be removed. No, it requires a special majority, which is a very tough requirement, right? Ensures that the impeachment is not politically motivated. Next, there is a proper judicial inquiry in place. Provides a fair investigation. Then the grounds of removal, they are very specific. That is proved misbehavior or incapacity. Now, if you look at the past instances, so we have got Justice V. Ramaswamy in 1993. He was actually accused of financial irregularities. The impeachment motion failed in the Lok Sabha due to lack of majority. Then we had Justice Soumitra Sen of 2011, first judge to resign during the impeachment proceedings in Rajya Sabha, avoiding the process. Then it was the famous case of Justice Cess in 2017. Now, he was basically accused of contempt of court but was not impeached. Instead, what the Supreme Court did was it sentenced him to imprisonment. So that is what the article is all about. It is trying to focus that there has to be a proper adherence to the code of conduct which has to be followed by the judges, and also it has. Otherwise, what we can have is the impeachment process, which is constitutionally mandated. That is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. So we have got the next article, which talks about the report, the working report of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, which talks about the female labor force participation rate in the country. Now, what the article says, it gives a number with respect to the female labor force participation rate. It also talks about the interstate variations with respect to what is the regional aspect with respect to how many women are participating in a particular area, right? So it says, for example, that in states like rich states like Punjab and Haryana, what you see is a low female labor force participation, right? So that is what the gist of the article is. So the female labor force participation increased in almost all the states during the 2017-18 period till 2022-23, with rural areas seeing larger gains than urban areas. That is one of the important points. Now, states such as Bihar, Punjab and Haryana have consistently reported low levels of the female LFPR, and this represents the interstate variation, right? So we have got the Haryana and Punjab, which is one of the richest states in the country, and still what you see is it has low female labor force participation. We initially discussed in the very first article that it's not just about the rich states. It's a phenomena that it's not just dependent on the kind of the income potential of a particular state. It is rooted in the dynamics, in the overall dynamics, social dynamics. Then we have got the Bihar, which is the poorest. Now, the rural female labor force participation, it rose to 41% from 24.6% during this particular period, while the urban, it increased from 25.4% to 20.4%. Now, it basically points out that even after excluding all those who worked as unpaid family workers or helpers from 2004 till 2022-23. Trends for increase in the female LFPR remain the same. And again, what it is trying to say is that there has been a consistent increase, as we talked in the very first article. Specifically, the increase has been observed in the rural female labor force participation rate. Now, what it says is that the married men consistently exhibit higher LFPR across states because they have to basically act as a breadwinner of the family, right? While the marriage significantly reduces the female LFPR. Again, the reason is that after marriage, the females have to basically migrate, and that reduces their employment opportunities and then their female labor force participation. In terms of the age, female LFPR forms a bell-shaped curve, peaking at 30-40 years and declining sharply, right? So what we are saying is that it is primarily a bell-shaped curve, that with the age bracket of 30 to 40 years, it primarily peaks, then it basically falls drastically. On the other hand, for male LFPR, it remains high, that is from ages 30 to 50, declining gradually thereafter. So if we talk about the states, different states, what it says is that eastern states, like for example, we have got the Bihar at the lowest LFPR. Again, different improvements have seen. For example, in the northeast part of the country, there have been improvements in female LFPR. For example, the states of the Nagaland and Arunachal Pradesh leading among these northeastern states, right? But the states, the rich states like Punjab and Haryana, they have recorded low female labor force participation rate. Now let's talk about a few of the terms which are associated with this particular article. So we have the PLFS, as I said in the beginning. It is conducted by the National Statistics Organization, part of Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, provides data on various labor market indicators, employment, unemployment, labor force participation. Introduced in 2017, it offers annual reports for the rural areas and quarterly report for the urban areas. Aims to capture short-term and long-term trends in the labor market. Then we have got the female labor force participation rate. Again, it implies the percentage of women aged 15 and above who are either employed or actively seeking work within the labor force, indicates women economic participation and societal gender dynamics. See, the objective to provide this information is to give you the definition, right? Initially, in the very first article, we have already discussed these points, right? So it can be calculated through this particular formula, that is number of women in the labor force upon the total female population above 15 years of age, and then multiplied by 100. We get the percentage. Then we have got the worker population ratio. It is a proportion of the population 15 years and above that is engaged in work or in employment. Basically, it is calculated as the number of employed persons upon total population above 15 years into 100. So this is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. Coming to the next article, it is with respect to the PM POSHAN scheme, also known as the midday meal scheme. Again, the gist of the article is that the center is trying to increase its commitment with respect to this particular scheme because of the inflation, because of the rise in the prices, right? So that is the overall gist. It also tries to provide, this article tries to provide what the scheme is all about, how many children are covered, how many, like what is the amount of the proteins which are required by the children which are given through this particular scheme. Now, the center will bear the additional cost of 425.6 crore on account of inflation and through this particular scheme, that is PM POSHAN. So under the scheme is basically one hot cooked meal is served to 11.7 crore students starting in Bal Vatika. Now, what is Bal Vatika? It is basically the preschool education, right? And classes 1 to 8 in 10.24 lakh government and government aided schools. So on the basis of the inflation index which is provided by the Labour Bureau, the Education Ministry has enhanced the material cost of pulses, vegetables and oils by 13.7%. Not important for exam, but the gist is that the center has increased its financial commitments. So each Bal Vatika and primary school student is eligible for 20 grams of pulses, 50 grams of vegetables and 5 grams of oil. Similarly, each upper primary student is eligible for 30 grams of pulses, 50 grams of vegetable and 7 grams of oil. Now, state also contribute since it's a centrally sponsored scheme. It's not central sector scheme. It is a centrally sponsored scheme. So states also have their contribution. Now, states and UTs are free to contribute more than their prescribed share. If they want, they can contribute more, and some states and UTs have been contributing more than their minimum mandatory share. Now, this basically augments the nutrition under the PM POSHAN scheme. The center also provides the 26 lakh tons of food grains through the Food Corporation of India, which the overall cost is borne by the center, that is 100% cost, including the subsidy of approximately 9,000 crore a year and 100% transportation costs from FCI depots, right? The per meal cost after adding all the components, including the food grain cost, Another scheme comes out to approximately rupees 11.54 for the Balvatika and primary classes and 16.74 for the upper primary classes. Now, let's study the scheme, what this scheme is all about. So the PM POSHAN scheme, it was launched in 21 and it's a revamped version, as I just told you, of the midday meal scheme designed to provide nutritional support to school children, aims to address the hunger and malnutrition. See, again, what the global hunger index has also talked about, that there have been instances of stunting, wasting, right, and undernutrition in the children, and that is the reason you have got these schemes which basically focus upon increasing the nutritional the capacity of these children, right, improving the school attendance and educational outcomes among the children from disadvantaged backgrounds. What are the key features? So the target beneficiaries are students from class 1st to 8th in the government and government aided schools, pre-primary children and enrolled in Balvatikas, coverage approximately 11.8 crore children across 11.2 lakh schools. Nutritional goals: provide one hot cooked meal to children to meet their nutritional requirements. Emphasis on locally sourced and diverse meal, right? So it's basically trying to focus upon the millets or the vegetables which are basically produced in that particular region. Financial structure: centrally sponsored scheme with a funding pattern of 60:40 and 90:10 for northeastern and Himalayan states. 100% funding for union territories without a legislature. Next, what is the special focus? So we have got the Tithi Bhojan, which is a part of this particular scheme. Community participation in providing supplementary meals to the children. Use of millets and traditional ingredients in meals to promote the local produce. What is the monitoring mechanism? So we have a proper information communication technology platforms, right, for real-time monitoring. Engagement with school management committees, which also include the parents of the children, to oversee the meal quality and distribution. Then we have got the development of social audit framework, very important, to enhance the accountability of the overall functioning of the scheme, to ensure accountability. So that is what you need to know with respect to this particular article. So coming to the last article of the day, it is with respect to the India Skills Report of 2025. Now this has talked about the state of Kerala, and it is the top states in terms of the employability in India. So what the article says is that the Kerala continues to lead as one of the most employable states. Now see, again, this is not important, but what is important is the India Skills Report, because there can be a probable question with respect to who publishes this report. So we'll talk about it. The report, published by the talent assessment agency VBox, in association with various agencies, for example, the AICT, that is All India Council for Technical Education, CII, that is Confederation of Indian Industries, and we have got the Association of Indian Universities, reveals that the Kerala's workforce maintains a strong employability rate of 71%, and it is placed on 5th position after Maharashtra, Delhi, and other states. Again, the report says that the study indicated that the overall employability in India continued to grow, with 54.81% of the assessed youths found to be employable. So again, what we're trying to say is that they need to have proper skills. There should not be a mismatch. That is, the kind of skills which are demanded by the industry, it has to be provided by the educational institutes. So if that situation is there, the employability would definitely increase. So we have got the India Skills Report. So you can see it is provided by the VBox. And then we have got other partners like AICT, the CII. The India Skills Report, released by the VBox in collaboration with AICT, CII and others, provides insight into the employability trends in the country. So it focuses upon the impact of artificial intelligence on jobs, skilling and workforce mobility. Key findings, as we just talked, that 51.25% of the youth assessed, they are found employable. Kerala is the top state for employability, supported by the initiatives like the ASAP Kerala. So it is basically a program for the skill acquisition, right? So advanced skill acquisition program of Kerala, which tries to enhance the skill of the candidates. Cities like Kochi and Thiruvananthapuram rank high in gender neutral employment interests. So this is what you need to know. It can be important for a question can be there with respect to the India Skills Report. That is it for today. I hope you really like the session. Do let us know through your likes and comments. Thank you. All the best.